Greetings, Internet. Welcome to episode number 194 of the Comic Watchers Show. I'm Matt. With me, as ever, is Chad. We're co-hosting this thing tonight, and you might notice that, as promised last episode, this is not Steve Fox. Steve Fox had an emergency, and so he wasn't able to join us last 2 weeks ago, but we're doing one better because we have got Mr. GAMAL Hennessy, who has an amazing new Kickstarter that just started for the business of freelance comic publishing. GAMAL, welcome.
Thank you very much, sir. Just want to point out that I'm sorry that Mr. Fox couldn't be able to join you. And the Kickstarter actually starts on Tuesday.
Oh, it starts on
page.
I totally misunderstood you. I'm very sorry. So, whet your appetite. So,
this is his second Kickstarter, so we'll let it.
Yeah, so absolutely. So, GAMAL, for those who may not be familiar with who you are, because even in the world of comics, you may not be necessarily a household name yet. Tell us a little bit about yourself, because your resume is a little unusual compared to what we typically see in the world of comics.
Yeah, well, my resume is pretty unusual in the world of law too, so I'll be happy to go over it and clarify anything. My name is GAMAL Hennessy. I am an attorney and author and business consultant who specializes in the comic book industry. I started out as the general counsel for a Japanese animation and manga company called Central Park Media, and that was back in the late 1900s. When I also, after that, I got recruited by Marvel to be the international publishing manager when that company decided they wanted to break back into the Japanese market. One of the things that I had to do while I was at Marvel was I had to handle a lot of the freelance deals during that period where there was quite a bit of the exclusivity wars, where a lot of companies trying to snap up freelance talent on exclusive contracts for large, ridiculous sums of money in some cases. But I also dealt with a lot of people who were not, of that tier, who I'd give them a contract, say, hey, take this to your lawyer, let me know what they think of it, and then we can work out the deal. But I quickly realized I knew that they didn't have a lawyer. And they knew they didn't have a lawyer, and we both knew they were going to sign whatever I put in front of them because I was Marvel, and they weren't. So when I left Marvel in 2003, I started my own practice, primarily just to help people understand what they were signing when they're signing contracts for their comics, because built into those contracts is the right to what could be very lucrative intellectual property. People could be signing it away and not know it. I did that for quite a while, but as the business started to change and more people got more opportunities with different types of comic book publishing, my law practice grew and the business grew, because I started to realize that I was helping people with the legal side, but they also needed help with marketing and understanding project management and distribution channel and all these other things, which is why in 2018, I started writing The Business of Independent Comic Book Publishing. There's this book right here, also available on Amazon, that walks you through the entire process of how to build a independent comic book publishing company. And then after that book was done, I started an organization, an online community called Comics Connection, which helps people kind of build business models in comics, no matter what kind of business they want to build. And the Kickstarter that I'm launching next Tuesday is going to be for the follow-up book to this one, because the new book is focusing specifically on freelance comic book publishing instead of independent.
That's a lot to digest.
I've been practicing the delivery for a while now, so I don't even have to breathe anymore.
I was going to say, you definitely hit a lot of nails on the head, just boom, 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 boom. So, I guess before we dive more into your backstory, because there's definitely some stuff in there that I would like to touch back upon. Let's talk about the business of freelance comic publishing as a Kickstarter. So tell us about the book itself, and why it is something that everyone should back and everyone should read if they are a creator.
Well, if you are if you've decided that you actually want to make comic books for other people, and when I say make comic books, this could be you want to do stuff on the creative side, writer, artist, letterer, whatever, or on the business side, whether it's marketing or web design or print management or anything else, you have to actually understand how those business models work and how those cycles work in terms of being able to establish yourself in the industry, find clients, make sure that you get paid, and make sure that you finish your projects in such a way that helps you get the next project. Because what a lot of people, they jump into comic books in general almost exclusively because they love comics. And then they figure out how the business works as they go along, which is in many cases a recipe for a disaster, because you could be losing huge sums of time, money, energy. You could be burning yourself out to the point where your physical and mental health are in jeopardy. There was actually an article I think Joseph published just today on Popverse about the impact of like page rates and, in terms of making a living wage and figuring out how you're going to do that. This book actually will help you navigate all that, so you don't have to learn by trial and error. You can just read the book and figure out what does and doesn't make sense for you as a freelance creator. Now, on the other side, if your business revolves around hiring freelancers, it would help if you actually knew what it was their business is like and what is actually motivating them. So you could, if you so chose, you could decide to build your projects in a way that's most beneficial both for you, your comic, and the freelancers, so that more people will want to work for you, and you're building a business that is actually sustainable, as opposed to just burning out groups of freelancers at a time to get your comic books out the door.
There's unfortunately tales of independent publishers today. This is still an ongoing thing that burned out, didn't pay people because they ran out of money. This, and we tend to think about this stuff in terms of maybe the 80s independent comic scene, or some of the Image guys in the 90s. Certainly not naming any names or anything, but just sort of to phrase it a little bit. But it sounds to me like people aren't learning, and they have these good intentions. Like you said, they love comics, they want to make comics, but there really hasn't been a guidepost or a source manual for how the hell to do this the right way up until now.
Well, the problem is, in many cases, if you look at like film or music or anything like that, there are a lot of books out there on the craft of actually creating your art, and there are books on the business side, so you can actually figure out what it is that you're doing, and you don't have to kind of learn on the job. Sure. What you actually pointed out in terms of people kind of jumping into it and really not, they go into it with good intentions, but it doesn't seem to work out. And that goes back to people being motivated by their love of the media.
Sure.
Like I have almost never found anyone working in comics who did not grow up reading comics, love comics, continues to read comics as much as you can. Because if you're a professional in comics, you quickly find out you don't really have a lot of time to read comics. But they love comics so much that blinds them to the horror stories. I mean, they've heard what happened to Siegel and Schuster. They heard the McFarlane v. Gaiman. They heard, the stuff that happened when Winter Soldier, the film, got released. They heard all that. But then when somebody offers them a gig, especially if it's a character that they really wanted to work on, or it's for a company that they grew up reading, they take the gig because there's no one to tell them not to take the gig. In a lot of cases, I will have people come to me with a contract and say, "Can you review this contract?" That's part of what I do. And I tell them, "Okay, this is a bad contract." And I know as I tell them that they're going to sign the contract anyway because they love comics and they want to work in comics. And they figure I'll sign this one bad deal and then the next deal will be better. Probably not, but hope springs eternal.
Because and this is sort of just the unspoken reality. There's as soon as you've signed the contract, now there's money on the table. Like it's no longer imaginary or theoretical. It's there. And at the end of the day,
on the table,
people
and there's a deadline.
Yes. What a lot of people forget at the end of the day is for all of our creative aspirations as creators, as fans, et cetera, Marvel and DC are an Image and whoever else are businesses. And they're going to do whatever they need to do to make the most amount of money. And there's a whole tangent there about the evils of capitalism that I won't get into. But I think, like you're saying, a lot of people, they get their blinders on and they see that reality. Now, going back a little bit to what something you touched on when you first left Marvel or around that time frame is there just aren't that many exclusive contracts anymore. I mean, to the point that when some creator does sign an exclusive contract with Marvel or DC, that in and of itself becomes newsworthy because everybody is freelance. So from your perspective, excuse me, having been on that side of the table, or let me rephrase that, your side of the table for as long as you have as a both passive observer and participant in the business side, how has that shift from gotta get everybody that on a contract to freelance really changed how you approach your side of things?
Well, the difference is in a lot of cases, I believe, just from an economic standpoint, there was a point where the big two decided that certain, and especially right after the gentleman left to form Image, that which was the high point of like the superstar creator. They wanted to actually try to replicate that to the extent that it was profitable by bringing in like your Brian Hitches and people of that level to get these exclusive deals and put them on titles that they wanted to succeed. Because keep in mind, on Marvel's side, that was when they had their Ultimate line, and they were really pushing their Ultimate line to attempt to actually bring in a new generation of readers. So they put the big names on the titles they wanted to be big, and then, that was how the model worked for a little while. But I think once you actually had the comic book characters, and not just Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Spider-Man, but a whole host of characters become household names through billion-dollar media projects, I think the mentality actually shifts. Because now you're saying, okay, the talent, the name on the talent, the talent name on the book is not necessarily going to be the end-all, be-all of whether that book sells or not. It's probably going to be more that, well, Robert Downey Jr. was Iron Man, so now we're probably going to sell more copies of Iron Man. But, and this is my analysis, this is not a statement from either Marvel or DC. I believe if you're talking about conglomerate, companies that have so many different revenue streams based on their intellectual property, that the money coming in from comics, the amount of comics you sell, is actually kind of irrelevant. Because if you sell, let's say you sell 50,000 copies of the Hulk, and let's say you make $1 a copy, that's $50,000. Great. You double that and you make $100,000 in one city for one movie in one weekend. You'll make $100,000.
Sure.
So the comic book itself serves two functions that's different for other kinds of comic book companies. For a conglomerate company, a comic book is actually an R&D exercise because we want to figure out which characters and which stories will actually translate into other more profitable media, and a marketing exercise where you are actually just trying to maintain the connection with the core fan base so you could actually spin things out later.
Right.
The only difference between this kind of comic book marketing and regular marketing is in most companies, you have to pay for your marketing. In comic books, we pay them for the marketing. We give them $5 an issue and they tell us this is a cool character. You should care about this character.
Right.
But that is infinitesimal compared to how much they make in t-shirts, video games, hats, movies, streaming money, cruise ships, theme parks, and Broadway shows and the comics. They need the comics. You can't have all the rest of it without the foundation.
Right. You have to have the comic for all the reasons you just said, but also if Warner down on through DC decided we're just not going to publish Superman comics anymore, that's a horrible PR blunder.
Exactly.
And they don't want that. So, I don't know. Discovery Warner right now, like, there's no way to know who's. I don't think the left hand knows what the right hand is doing 99.9% of the time. But in ideal circumstances, you don't want to sit here and say, well, we're just not going to make Superman comics anymore. Superman is bigger than comics. This is a lost leader for us. Not going to happen. One thing I do want to note is I've kind of thought about what you mentioned with the shift from character to creator names back to characters. And I think the piece of that puzzle that didn't get mentioned is that the name recognition piece shifted to the independent scene.
Yes.
So Greg Rucka or Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips, they can sell a comic based on name alone.
Yes.
It's less, yes, to a certain set of fans, if for whatever reason Ed Brubaker decided he wanted to write Captain America again, yay, we're all going to be happy. But like you were saying, Captain America is going to sell regardless.
Yes, but the difference there is
being canceled.
Yeah, the difference there is, and I think Mark Millar talked about this in an article that an interview he did a couple weeks ago, that a lot of the path for a lot of very successful creators on the freelance or the creator-owned side is to start at a Marvel or a DC, work your way up into a major book, ride that book out for a run of a year, 2 years, so that your name recognition is associated with the book, then leave the book. Now you could go out and get a much better creator-owned deal than you could have if you just got your creator-owned deal as your first deal. Yeah. Now, if you go to get another freelance deal, the page rate is going to be significantly higher.
Oh, absolutely.
So because riding that wave.
You're not some guy. So, and I'll use now every once in a while there's an exception to that rule. That Texas Blood.
Yes.
From Image. Nobody knew who Chris Condon was. People, okay, Jacob Phillips, he's Sean Phillips' son, but whatever, nepotism, whatever. And the book itself was just so damn good that people came to the table anyway. That doesn't really happen that much anymore.
Well, you do have, if you're depending on the segment of the industry that you're talking, you do have in some cases a book that will actually get a huge amount of buzz in that segment, because the comic book industry is actually much more, there's a lot more segments than just the direct market. You have your webtoon, you have your crowdfunding, you have your bookstore, you have your library. So you could, without necessarily quote unquote name recognition, get a book that catches fire in that market. Now, the
Absolutely.
direct market may not know who this person is or what they did, but they could be making 50, 60, $70,000 on their Kickstarter, and it doesn't make a difference if the direct market knows or not.
Right. But by virtue of that,
Mhm.
then they're siloed.
Yes.
And
Well,
maybe that works
it's
to their advantage. Maybe it plays to their strength. Maybe it doesn't. But it does, like you said, it segments them and kind of puts them in this little box. Which, again, interesting vagary of where we are in the world of comics in 2023. Chad, I've been hogging the conversation. What? Please jump in. I do this every episode, Gamal. I feel really bad because Chad's like so nice about it.
Well, he looks like he's very calm, and he's not. He's been here before, so it's fine.
He's also frozen, so I guess it doesn't.
Yeah, I guess he waited so long that he just dropped out. Hey, Chad.
Okay.
Sorry, we're having some storms here, so.
Oi, the storms. Well, jump in, Chad. I've been monopolizing the time.
Oh, well, I know we've talked before when your first book came out, and I think once after that. What did you learn from the first book that you've kind of applied to the second book?
What I learned from the first book, and which I kind of knew as I was putting the finishing touches on the first book, is that if you're making a book to actually help people understand an industry that is constantly changing, your book will kind of be old as soon as you press send to send it to the printer. Which is one of the reasons I started Comics Connection, which is an ongoing kind of conversation I have with people who really want to build up their business models. And we have discussions about the news in the industry every week. We bring in experts to interview so that they can understand the different perspectives of different aspects of the industry. We have online lessons, we have the Discord, so that the information in the book itself serves as the foundation, but we have that ongoing conversation, through the online channels. That is going to have to be part of what happens with this book as well, which is why in the Kickstarter at the higher backing tiers, if you back the book at the higher tier, you automatically get your first month of Comics Connection for free. So you could actually digest what's in the book and have conversations about it with people who are just as passionate about not just the creative side, but the business side as you are. So I think that's going to help a lot of people. I also realized that in the first book, I did not spend a huge amount of time on taxes because nobody wants to hear about taxes. But if you're working freelance, you kind of have to, you can't just not do it. You can't Wesley Snipes your way through that.
Businessmen.
Exactly.
Better
so
pay
that there's like,
taxes.
there's like 4 chapters in the book that are specifically on taxes, tax deductions, tax audits. It'll be great. It'll be fantastic.
You're really selling the book right now, Gamal. Here's 4 chapters on the one thing everybody hates. It's so important.
The way I look at it is you better...
One of your opportunities could be you reading those chapters as the audiobook.
Oh yeah, that'll be the most fun part, where I have to sit in a recording booth and then just read that. Yeah, it's not good. But I do think that it's better to actually understand exactly how taxes impact a freelance creator and get it from me, as opposed to getting a letter from the IRS and letting them explain to you how it works, because that's nobody wants that.
Nobody wants that. Nobody does want that. That's funny. So, I'm sorry.
Can we take a step back and I know again we've talked before. What's your history with comic books? I mean, what got you interested in them, and when it made you want to pursue this line of your writing?
The first comic that I think I remember reading, it was probably I was 5 or 6, was a Neil Adams Batman. Probably The Return of the Joker, which is probably something a 5 or 6 year old should not have been reading, even though it was approved by the Comics Code. But I was reading comics all the way through, the explosion of the direct market. I remember in Queens where I lived, because I grew up in New York, there were like 5 or 6 comic book shops within walking distance. And I did not live in a heavily populated area, but there was still so many places that that's where I discovered like Elf Quest and Grendel and books like that. So going into places like that, you start to understand that there's things beyond the big two. I didn't call them big two then. I was like 10 or 11. But you understood that comics were just as complex in terms of genre, in terms of variety, as television was. So I read comics all the way through law school. I probably read more comics than I was supposed to in law school, which probably impacted the grades that I got in law school. However, the fact that people knew I read comics, when a colleague of mine was offered a job at this Japanese animation company, and she already had a job, she said, I know the person who could take this job. That's how I got my first job. I just walked in and they said, you have a law degree? I said, yes. You understand comics? I said yes, but actually all I did was read them. I did not understand comics. But that's how I got the first job, and that has led me through all the other different stages. Is that when I go to law schools and tell them what comic book law is and how I got my job and my career and stuff, I always have to tell them, do not do what I did, because that was wrong. It was the wrong answer. But it worked out for me, but that doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do. So
what drew you to law school to begin with? And don't say it's because you read an issue of Daredevil.
No. It wasn't that. Because when I was reading Daredevil, they actually de-emphasized the courtroom stuff, so that wasn't really a thing. Okay. Went to law school because I lost a bet with my mom.
Oh,
my mom wanted, because back then, if you're a Gen X, your mom wanted you to be a doctor, lawyer, and Indian chief. Right? Couldn't be an Indian chief because I can't. And I couldn't be a doctor because, math and blood and stuff. No, thank you. But I wanted to do other things. She said, okay, listen, there's a test you have to take called the LSAT to see if you could get into law school. She said, take the test. If you do well on the test, you go to law school. If you don't do well on the test, I'm not going to bother you about law school. I said, fine. I did not prepare for this test. I signed up for the test on the last day. I only bought one pencil because you did it in pencil back in the late 1900s. And I took the test, guessed at a lot of stuff, and when the results came back, I had a scholarship to law school. So I lost a bet, and that's
It's actually kind of interesting the way that all plays out. Obviously, I mean, more for just anecdotal reasons, but you've got such a niche path that you've carved for yourself in terms of career. I mean, I'm not a believer in personally in things like fate or serendipity, whatever, but it kind of seems like everything just kind of fell into place the way it needed to for you to be right where you are now, kind of the lone guy at the top of the mountain shouting at the rest of the industry in a good way, not a crazy way.
Yeah, there's the thing about my path through comic book law is that there have been like years where there was very little business or no business at all for the practice, because there was a period you had to educate people that they needed a lawyer who specialized in comic books in the first place.
Sure.
A lot of people see lawyers. They're saying they see dentists. Like, yeah, I should go see one, but I'm not going to, and I'm going to avoid it. So there was that a long dry spell that might have been 7 or 8 years of just trying to just teach people what this was and how this worked and why they should actually care about it. And I think one of the things that helped things fall into place was the explosion of the MCU, because right around that time, people started to say, okay, well, we know that comic books make money in like other things, but if every movie's $1 billion, then you get more and more people are interested in, well, maybe I should get into this. Maybe I should try to understand how the business works, because with that explosion, that's when people started to tell the stories of, well, yeah, the movie made this much, the actor made that much, but the creator did not. So, and it was also around that time that Kickstarter started to become a thing. And so a lot of my nit comes from the fact that I was inside the kind of the machine of how it worked. And I did not stay inside the machine, because there's a lot of people who know far more than I do about the way the comic book industry works, but they work at the comic book publishers. So they don't necessarily have a vested interest in sharing that information. If I'm the lone Ronin on the outside, then it's my job to actually help all of the people who are not being helped by the larger industry, and then let them build up their businesses. And as their businesses grow, 'cause some of my clients, they started out, they were doing 1 or 2 books a month. Now they're doing like 10, 15 books a month. They're acquiring other companies. They're doing this, that, and the third. And if you get 2 or 3 of those, it's fine. It's great.
From a legal perspective, what's the best prescription you can think of for the matter of royalties? Not necessarily character ownership, but you used the example of the Winter Soldier movie earlier, where, obviously Ed Brubaker doesn't own Captain America, but his story was heavily borrowed from, in characters he did reinvent necessarily. Made somebody a truckload of money. How, again, legally, contract law perspective, how do you prescribe to fix that problem?
The way that you actually fix that is you have to understand very clearly what type of comics you're going to get into. Because when people walk into a comic book shop on Wednesday or Tuesday, whenever Lunar delivers the books now, it's not the same day, they're all comics on the shelf, but each one of them might have got there through one of 3 different processes. There was an independent comic book publishing company, a creator-owned deal, or a freelance deal. If you decide you want to get into comics and you want to get into freelance comics, you have to accept the reality that in 99% of the cases, there's not going to be any back-end participation. What you are doing is you are actually getting into a low-risk, low-reward situation. If the book doesn't sell, if the book doesn't become a movie, if the book doesn't do anything, and the vast majority of books they don't do anything, then as a freelancer, you don't care, because you got your money up front, and whatever happens to the book afterwards just happened. But the fact that you got paid up front means if anything happens to that book later, like The Winter Soldier, you get 0, because that is the deal that you made up front. If you want to have a deal where you actually own some of the intellectual property and therefore get some of the money that may come later, you have to either go independent, which means it's your company, and the upside there is any movie deal or anything else that comes from that, you get to keep the vast majority of that. Millar World, Bendis, Frank Miller, all of those people, when their original IP got turned into other media, they got that money. But that also means you now have to run a publishing business.
Right.
It is not enough for you to be a creator and be reclusive and to just do your fantastic art. And because if Shakespeare and Da Vinci came together and made a comic book, but nobody marketed it, it wouldn't make a difference. It would be a great comic book. Maybe they don't do sequential art. But the fact of the matter is you have to have the business. If the business fails, your book fails, no matter how good your book is.
But what about, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The last piece is just, if you want to own a piece of it and you don't want to deal with the business side necessarily, you then go try to get a creator-owned deal where you get to be creative and then the publisher allegedly takes care of the business side of it. But the downside there is if you sign the wrong deal, you could hand over all of your rights and all of your revenue to the publisher, and the movie could still come out. The book could still sell 1 million books, but you're not going to get any of that money. So every type of publishing has its upsides and downsides. You just have to figure out where you want to land.
So what about the concept of back-end royalties from other media?
Mm-hmm. If you have leverage,
a thing right now. I mean, for actors it is, right?
Yeah, for actors it is, and
it's 50 mil, off a movie that bombs because the back-end royalties and the international market loved it, right? But is there such a thing for the Ed Brubaker / Winter Soldier situation? At least
I believe that is one of the other reasons why the exclusive deals went away. That is one of the reasons why you don't see creators and artists and writers on runs of like 5, 7, 10 years on a book.
Right.
Because the more prominence those creators get, the more leverage they have in the negotiation. The more leverage they have in the negotiations, the more they can ask for back-end participation and royalties and everything else. If everybody is just getting a page rate and nobody gets to be big enough to actually get anything else besides a page rate, one of two things will happen. One, they will continue to do the page rate thing and they'll continue to be freelance. You never have to give them royalties, back-end participation. Or they will jump and they'll go do a creator-owned deal, and maybe that in that situation, they'll get royalties and back-end participation. It's going to be a much smaller pie,
sure,
but at least they'll get a piece of it.
Right.
Invincible, you still get a piece. It's not, Invincible is not, Batman, but more of something is better than zero of everything else.
I mean, do you foresee a situation though where that sort of thing could become more of a norm, like as we move hopefully in a direction of more creator empowerment? I mean, I
believe it is possible for more and more creators to have long-term investments in intellectual property that they create if they are willing to actually venture out into the woods of independent and creator-owned.
Mm-hmm.
I do not foresee a scenario where a Marvel, a DC, or even a Valiant, for that matter, becomes so dependent on the creator that they are forced into a position where they have to give out more back-end participation.
Right.
For that to happen, because the characters are now in charge of that whole scenario, the characters would have to become so unpopular that the companies aren't giving up anything by giving out the back-end participation. But the idea that characters that have a 40, 60, 80-year head start in terms of popularity will all of a sudden not be popular anymore, I don't see it.
Interesting. So when people read The Business of Freelance Comic Publishing, What do you hope is the big takeaway? Like, there's obviously lots of bite-sized nuggets, etc., throughout. But if somebody takes one big thing away from this book, what do you hope it is?
The one thing that you need to take away from the book is you have to hold on to your love of the comic book media. You have to hold on to your love of actually reading comics, creating comics, and all of that. But you have to temper that with a understanding of how the business works and how the business is going to impact your life.
Right.
What you need to avoid is a situation where you fight for months or years to get a gig, you start to get gigs, and then the next thing you know, you can't afford to live where you live, you can't afford to eat, your health is deteriorating, you are burned out because you chased the dream of I want to make comics because I love comics,
right,
and then got dragged down by the realities of the business. If you understand the realities of the business, you are much more likely to be able to navigate through it and make comics, love comics, and still be healthy and not homeless. That's the big thing. Don't be homeless making comics.
Unfortunately, it's happened to some pretty famous people.
Yeah.
But not just in decades past.
No, and like in months past. I mean, right before San Diego, I think it was Ian McGinty. There's every few months, there's always someone who's either they or a family member are in poor health and they don't have the cash, so they turn to GoFundMe, they turn to the Hero Initiative, which are doing great work to actually help these people. But I think if we get the next generation of comic creators to understand independent comics, freelance comics, creator-owned, they will be able to actually build those investments. Because ultimately, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about taking your creativity and turning it into a financial investment, turning those investments into something that is actually profitable and enjoyable for them instead of being one or the other, because it doesn't have to be one of them.
Right. Few things are truly binary like that. Chad, once again, I've monopolized the conversation for a good 20 minutes.
That's fine. It allowed me to absorb everything and come up with my questions. So
good.
So you mentioned that when you were writing the first book, things were evolving, and I'm sure things are evolving now. What's the next big thing that you see freelancers kind of facing? Because I don't, because there for a while we thought NFTs was going to be the big thing, and that kind of seemed to fizzle out pretty quickly. And now I don't want to say it because we could probably spend a whole night on the AI.
Yes. Well, one of the things that the big thing that AI is actually going to impact both the publishers and the freelancers in ways that are still in flux because the legal cases are still being tried and companies are still coming up with their policies or what they will or will not do. The problem is, and this is always the problem when you're trying to match technology with the law, is that the technology will always move faster than the law will because it takes a long time for people to figure out what they're going to do legally because lawyers charge by the hour and they talk too much and they take too long. And by the time people are still trying to figure out from a legal standpoint, NFT, everybody's kind of moved on from NFTs. We still haven't figured it out. But for artists and writers who are trying to kind of figure out what should they be doing with AI, what should they be doing against AI, what how is AI going to change the amount of work they can get, what type of work they can get, what's going to be asked of them. All of these things are things that they're going to have to navigate. And there's a specific section, a couple sections in the book that actually deal with AI specifically. But one section, there's a whole chapter on how you actually adapt to change. Because the cycle of making a book, whether it's 3 months, 3 years, whatever that's going to be, there are going to be changes within the industry so that the industry will look slightly different from the time you started any particular gig to the time you left it. Some people might, the people that you counted on, the editors who got you jobs in certain companies, may not be at those companies anymore by the time you actually get out from the other side of the gig. They may be higher up in the company. They may be gone. That company may be gone. 8 new companies may have shown up. There may be a completely new medium for comics. Like there was a point people were making comics and we had digital comics. We didn't have Webtoons. All of a sudden Webtoons exist, and now there's a huge other space where you can get work if you know that it exists and you can actually tap into that market. There's, at a certain point, crowdfunding is becoming more complex. Getting that work and signing those deals, because if you're doing a crowdfunding book, you need a contract just as much if you did any other book. But it has to deal with the specifics of how crowdfunding works and the idea of, are you going to get paid if and only if the book hits its goal? That's not something that you had to deal with if you're doing a book for Oni Press. You know, you get your page rate, you get paid. So AI is going to be a thing, but there's a lot of things that change in the industry. Some are minor shifts, some are major shifts that you have to kind of, as you absorb them, have to decide, how is that going to impact what I'm doing and how am I going to deal with
it? Okay.
And those who cannot evolve become dinosaurs, unfortunately. And
Absolutely.
you know, again, there's very few Dan Jurgens out there that have been doing it for 40 years.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
How many people started 40, 50 years ago that have been consistently able to stay productive and stay busy and keep getting gigs as compared to the ones whose names you don't even remember anymore? Oh,
I believe
whatever happened to that, you know, such and such, and then you look them
mm-hmm.
up on their wiki or whatever, or Google them, and oh shit, that's actually really sad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, for every Alex Ross that you have, you probably have dozens and dozens of people who got in and couldn't stay in, either
Right.
because it was financially not viable, it was physically not viable, it was mentally not viable. But you also have hundreds and hundreds of people who never got in.
Yeah.
Who they made a portfolio, they did their pitch, they never actually landed a gig. So this industry, I think, though, as an entertainment lawyer in a broad sense, I always try to remind people that this industry is not necessarily unique compared to other types of industries that focus on narrative art. Like for every novelist that's a Stephen King, there's 10,000 people who released a book that sold 3 copies. For every $1 billion movie, there are dozens of movies that did not make a profit, especially in their theatrical release window, and hundreds more that are in development hell. I've worked on at least 12 or 15 film deals in the past half dozen years. One of them actually became a short film. All the money was spent, all the work was done. There is no product. So it is a small margin of success when you talk to like long-term longevity in comics, but that is actually across the board, across all sorts of entertainment in America, primarily because we have a very skewed concept of art as a profession.
Yeah, absolutely. And that comes down to the unhealthy relationship between art and commerce, I think,
Yeah.
at the end of the day. But we're down to about our last 10 minutes. I want to shift to something that's not like crazy heavy and super academic.
I can try.
Oh my gosh. Gamal, what comics are you into right now, man? What are you enjoying?
I actually read a wide variety of stuff, especially in the summer when I just got back from San Diego and other places. I am reading, there's a book called In Search of Gil Scott-Heron, which is from Titan Book.
I really want to get my hands on that.
Yep, I'm reading that. That is an interesting take. It is not what I thought it was going to be, but it is still interesting. I just went back because back when Amazon still let Comixology sell comics, I actually bought quite a few comics on, when they were discounted. So I just finished reading Jessica Jones' Purple Daughter, which was actually quite good. I've come to the conclusion that I really like, because I've read Marvel most of my life, and because I work there, it is a special thing. But what I do is I really just read the books that are not tied into any large-scale crossover event.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm going back. I'm reading, there's a Taskmaster trade paperback. Oh, that's cool.
It's fun.
Yeah. And as long as I don't have to read 80 other books to get a story that I'm all about it. There's what's on my shelf. Oh, I bought. When I heard, in New York, there's a very famous comic shop called Jim Hanley's Universe that is closing down. So I went to Jim Hanley's over the weekend, and I now have visual aids. Great. Let's see. This is the Gil Scott-Heron.
Beautiful.
It's hardcover, and it's not very expensive. But here's what I got. I got this this story, Anais Nin, Sea of Lies, which is a hardcover, fantastic. I haven't read it yet, but Elektra, Black, White, and Red, White, and Blood, Black, White, and Blood, something like that.
There's some cool stuff happening in there. Marvel's really doing a good job with their Black, White, and Red anthologies.
The first Black, White, and Red, though, that I remember ever seeing was not from Marvel. It was from Grendel.
Yes.
When Matt Wagner did Black, White, and Red, which is
circa 2006, 2007.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Grendel is one of my favorite characters. So whenever he does anything, I pre-order because Grendel's amazing. Wildcats, because I was there in the 90s when Jim Lee did his thing, and I just buy those. Half the time I don't even like them. I just buy them for no reason. And Blade Runner 2099. This is the second volume. I read the first volume digitally, and I enjoyed it. So I'm now reading the second volume because I'm a big Blade Runner, cyberpunk kind of fan. I'm actually reading. There's an audio book from the people who did Cyberpunk 2077 that I'm actually reading, and it's long, but they understand the genre, they understand the narrative. So that's what I'm reading in a nutshell.
Awesome.
So I see you must have done a panel at San Diego. Are you doing anything this year at New York?
I did 5 panels in San Diego, which is not something that I recommend if you're, just want to hang out. Don't do 5 panels. I submitted, I think, 4 panels for New York because last year I was on 3 in New York, and all of my panels got waitlisted. So I think I'm only doing there's a continuing legal education program that New York Comic Con does every year, and the way the program works is lawyers get to go to New York Comic Con if they sit through this 3-hour class to get credit to like maintain their law license. So what a lot of lawyers do, they're like, wow, I want to go to Comic-Con. I want my firm to pay for it. So I'll just go to this class. You go there for 3 hours, and then you can sit in Comic-Con for 4 days. It's actually pretty good. It's a pretty good deal. So we teach that. Me and like 4 other attorneys teach that, and I'm going to be doing that. But that's the only panel I'll be doing in New York Comic Con this week.
Well, maybe I'll run into you. I'll probably just be there Thursday and Friday. But
okay, I will I know I'll be there. When I'm not doing the panels, a lot of times you just have to meet clients because the clients are scattered all over the country. The only time you get to see them is New York, San Diego, Orlando, Chicago, Seattle. So this is when you get to see your client.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, Gamal, it's been an honor talking with you for this past hour.
Do you want to give them a chance to kind of do a final pitch for the Kickstarter?
That's what I was leading to.
Okay.
Chad. You don't say 2 words the whole interview, and then right at the end, you gotta cut me off at the. No, not really. I just want to say it's been a true pleasure speaking with you, picking your brain, getting your unique perspective on comics. Again, like Chad was saying, do you want to give a final little shout out to or elevator pitch for the business of freelance comic publishing?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to work in comics either as a freelancer or bringing in freelancers to work on your comics now or in the future, you kind of need to understand how that business works from an economic and legal perspective. This book will actually walk you through that. So you don't have to learn on the job. You don't have to learn trial by error. You don't have to waste a lot of time, energy, and brain cells figuring out how things work. The book will actually lay it out for you. The Kickstarter the preview page is currently available now. If you just type in Gamal Hennessy onto Kickstarter, you will probably find it. And the Kickstarter itself, the campaign launches next Tuesday, and it will run, like most Kickstarters, for 30 days. There's in the backer tiers, you can get the book digitally or in print. And at different tiers, you can also get the business of independent comic book publishing if you missed it the first time, in digital or in print. And again, the organization that we have that actually supports comic creators building their business models over time. If you back the project at those higher tiers, you get 1 month free. And that is the whole pitch.
Inspired reading. That's all I have to say. Chad?
And where can we find you on social media? And I know you have the Facebook group.
Yep, we have Comics Connection has a Facebook group, but my mom was very she was ahead of the curve. So she gave me a name that is very easy to find on the internet. You type in Gamal Hennessy, you're not going to find anybody else but me. So you can find me on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Twitter. It's not called X, it's called Twitter. You can find me on Blue Sky, although I'm not there very much. If you want to get a free consultation, if you need a legal consultation for something that you're working on right now, I offer free half-hour consultations. If you go to my website, it's Creative Contract Consulting. You fill out the form. We set you up with a consultation to help you figure out whatever it is from a legal or business standpoint that you need to figure out for the books that you're working on right now. That is going to continue whether or not there is a Kickstarter.
That's great. I loved it. I love hearing every last syllable of that. Gamal Hennessy, thank you for spending the last hour with us. Folks, I say the same thing at the end of every episode, and it never seems to change, but the world can be a harsh and cruel and increasingly warm place. But it doesn't have to be. Get out there, read something cool, support your local comic shop, do good unto others, because these things do have their own energy and likely will boomerang back on you in some awesomely cool way that you cannot possibly foresee. So until next time, we are the Comic Watchers, and this is our show, and we will see you in the funny pages
next week.
Holy cow, are we sure?
I think it's Ed Bresson.
Holy moly. Okay, next week it is then. Till next time.